On the 6th of July 2018, the founder and leader of the Japanese Doomsday cult that carried out a deadly attack using gas on the Tokyo subway in the 1990s was brought into an execution chamber for his demise. He was stood under the gallows, and the executioner secured the noose around his neck. Shoko Asahara was a very strange man, and he was a leader of the cult named Aum Shinrikyo, and he claimed he was almost a godlike figure, and his followers were responsible for many crimes. Still today, some of his followers remain in prison, and he was later convicted of 27 counts of murder, and it was argued that Asahara eventually intended to overthrow the government and make himself the new emperor of Japan. Join us today as we look at the execution of Shoko Asahara, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Shoko Asahara was born in March 1955, and he was partially blind and was also sent to a school for this. However, he would fail in his goal following graduation to get into medical school. He then opened up his own pharmacy inside of Shiba, but he was arrested for selling fake medicines, and because of this his business failed and he went bankrupt. But he had become very interested in religion and went on pilgrimage to India and even met the Dalai Lama. But he then returned to Japan and decided to set up his own religion, and he tried to recruit new members in different ways, handing out leaflets and preaching on the streets, as well as teaching yoga and trying to heal using herbal medicine. What he established was Aum Shinrikyo, and it was considered a controversial religion, and it was to begin with involved in publishing comics and literature. The followers claimed they could cure illnesses and improve health through different means, and the religious practices were strange. They varied from taking hallucinogens to even people being given shock therapy. But in the 1980s, the cult began to attract a lot of criticism, as they were linked to forcing members to remain against their will, and also to give over money to Aum Shinrikyo. But things got a lot more brutal. A lawyer named Tsutsumi Sakamoto was in 1989 working on a lawsuit against the group, and Aum Shinrikyo tried to get an interview regarding this band. But because of this, a number of members of the cult drove to the home of Sakamoto in Yokohama, and they were armed with injections filled with potassium chloride. They planned to kidnap him, and he was sleeping at his home. At 3 a.m. on the 5th of November 1989, the members entered his home, and he was smashed in the head with a hammer and injected with potassium chloride, and then strangled. His wife and 14-month-old child also suffered the same fate. But the family were then hidden in metal drums, and their bedsheets were burned, and the teeth of the victims were even smashed to conceal identification. The bodies were later found, and by this time they had just been reduced to bone. Aum Shinrikyo, led by Asahara, went further, and they carried out chemical weapons attacks in Matsumoto, and they wanted to attack 3 judges, and they built a stockpile of sarin to use this. Asahara was angered by the city, and he wanted to establish an office there, but was not allowed to do so. But at 10:40 p.m. on the 27th of June 1994, the cult using vans released the gas, and casualties were reported and were sent to hospital. They released the gas into a residential block of flats. The victims were suffering from a number of symptoms, including eye pain, but there were 5 fatalities. One man was even left in a coma for 14 years by the attack. Under Shoko Asahara's leadership, the group went further, and they carried out many different other attacks, and they even tried to cause an anthrax epidemic at one point. They continued to manufacture the nerve agent sarin and also VX, and they used it to attack people and their enemies. A number of assassinations of outspoken opponents of the group took place. However, their most infamous action occurred on the 20th of March 1995. Aum members released a chemical weapon similar to sarin on 5 subway trains in Tokyo. This killed 13 commuters and injured 54 people very seriously, and also affected 980 people. It's also believed that 6,000 may have been affected by the sarin. However, Asahara, following the raid, was alerted to the fact there were planned police raids on cult buildings and sites, and he may have ordered the attack to divert police away from the group. However, because of the attack, huge raids then took place on Aum Shinrikyo. But many people then heard about what they had planned, as the police found huge stockpiles of weapons and poisons that had the capability to kill around 4 million people in the form of sarin. They also had military helicopters and a huge amount of explosives, and many members of the cult were arrested for different offences. But Shoko, the leader, then tried to hide out, and he was eventually found hiding inside a false wall in a cult building, which was known as a sixation. But investigations emerged that showed Aum Shinrikyo members had infiltrated different parts of society, and many of these learned of information relating to the cult, and they could keep the heat off the group. When Shoko was arrested, he acknowledged that he had been involved in ordering the killings of dissenting people, and Shoko Asahara faced 27 counts of murder in 13 different indictments for his actions as a cult leader. The prosecution argued that he had given the orders to attack the subway and to overthrow the government, and that he planned to use his members to attack the royal family, and with this Shoko Asahara would then become the Emperor of Japan. His trial took 7 years to conclude and finish, and he was then sentenced to death. A number of his disciples and former followers would even testify against him. The defence tried to claim that Shoko Asahara was mentally ill and was not fit enough to stand trial. He remained silent for the majority of his trial and only spoke in mutters to himself, but when he was in prison he spoke to the guards and said that he had maintained silence out of his own free will. There was no appeal because of this, and further retrial appeals were declined, but his execution was then delayed due to the arrest of further cult members and more evidence coming to light. However, on the 6th of July 2018, inside of the Tokyo detention house, Shoko Asahara was executed. He was led into the prison's execution chamber, and his final words, it was said, were to make sure that his remains were sent to his fourth daughter, and she had planned to dispose of his ashes at sea. There were debates around this, as his wife and third daughter, along with other members of the family, were concerned that she wanted to keep the ashes of Shoko as a shrine for members of Aum Shinrikyo, so they could then be worshipped for years to come. 2 years after his execution, the ashes still remained there. For those people whose family members were killed by the actions of Aum Shinrikyo, the execution of Shoko Asahara was justified. One person said, "He of course deserves death. The execution was processed as it should have been, so no tears for me fall at all." He was a bizarre cult leader who even tried to make out he could float and hover, but he was a man who advocated brutal attacks upon Japanese civilians to further his cult and to one day achieve his dreams of becoming the emperor. He was a very strange character, and in a later video we will delve more into this, but today there's still elements of Aum Shinrikyo that do exist. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.